Good afternoon. You guys can be seated. I just want to thank you for joining us here today. My name is Diana. And no matter where you are with faith, I want you to know that we believe what we just sang. Not just that we are loved by Jesus, but that you are welcomed here, especially, just as you are. In fact, that's why we have worked so hard to create this place, because we believe that our city needs somewhere that people can go to have honest conversations about what they believe, and even more importantly, what they don't believe. We also feel that being part of something bigger here at Experience Church is something that gives our lives meaning. And that's why many of us support the church financially. So if that's something that you're interested in partnering with us to make these environments happen where we can have those hard conversations, there's boxes in the back. Or you can hop on to a computer or your phone. We use the Tidely app. I would love to have you partner with us in making that happen. And if you want to know anything about where your donations go to, we have the hub in the back. We would love to have you stop by and answer any questions. This afternoon, we're going to be continuing on our series about being honest with God. And Pastor David has been answering some tough questions, or addressing them at least, about why God would send his son and why there's suffering in the world. And today we're going to be looking at division and why there's division. And I will assume that some of what we say might be divisive. And if it is, we would love to hear about it. So please let us know what you think after we wrap up today. Welcome to part 3 in Honest to God.
Hello everyone, it's good to see you today. I want to welcome you to the third part of our series, Honest to God. And we started with this series intentionally because we believe we have all questions, right? And we believe that there's something powerful that happens when we ask honest questions about our faith, about where we are in life, and in terms of what we believe in terms of this God, this entity. So we're welcome kind of every question, and we're trying to, I don't have all the answers obviously, but we're trying to troubleshoot some of the greatest questions you may have if you're seeking or you're fighting in terms of wrestling with this idea of a God, of this person, of Jesus. And today I want to begin by sharing something kind of personal that if you know me, you know this already about me, but if you don't, you're going to get to know me a little bit better. And maybe you can identify a little bit, because this is what we're going to talk about today. But I came to the United States when I was 17 years old as an international student. And even though what I'm about to say is a little bit funny, it's actually not that funny, but you're going to laugh, but that's okay. But it's true what I want to say. I came to the States because I told my parents that I wanted to play basketball in America. Yeah. I told my parents, hey, I want to go to the US because I want to play basketball. And I think, my dream was short-lived, pun intended. Because I realized, hey, you're pretty short, David, to actually fulfill this dream that you have of playing basketball. But anyway, that was still my dream, and I kind of remember that since I was in middle school, I remember being made fun of because I'm short even by Mexico standards. So that's short. And I remember growing up in elementary school, junior high, and always, I had nicknames given by me that had to do with my size. And I don't know if you remember Easter, if you were with us Easter, one of our biggest complaints was that after row number 5, they couldn't see me. So I'm like, I cannot do anything about that. I mean, like thanks, but we'll try to get better next time. But I don't know if you ever be picked on for something that perhaps you have no control over. Or maybe you're in a situation right now that you hang out with a group of people who are getting picked on. And for you, it could be full-on discrimination because you either, again, hang out with a group of people or because you just, have experienced something that I know many times you have no control over. Because people see, hey, you're different than me in this area. And maybe you kind of brush it out because you think, hey, this is high school, right? This is the high school years or my junior high years. But it's with you always. And I don't know what that is in your life. I don't know what type of discrimination maybe you, not now, but maybe you experienced before. But what it does to you and me, it kind of, when we experience this, it's very dehumanizing. Because even if it's to me as something as small as my height, maybe for you something greater than that. And we kind of look at this, and when we experience that, it kind of throws us out of balance. Because whatever this thing is, again, is with you always. And what that does, when we kind of get thrown out of balance, we can go either of two ways. Either we kind of power up, we compensate for it in personality. Maybe you become a little bit bolder, maybe you have a little more of an attitude. Or you kind of go the other way, which is the way I went. You kind of disappear. And you become very invisible because you're incredibly self-conscious. So if you experience this, I know, you know what that feels like. Now, the good news is that here in the United States, you guys have an extraordinary intolerance for these kind of things. I mean, you even have a name for this. You call it bullying. And I don't know if you know this, but in other parts of the world, they don't translate that term. Like, they literally take that word and they use it again, like bullying. And here in the United States, bullying is perceived as something wrong, something bad. And it can get a little political, and I don't want to get there, because we think that this idea of bullying, as an American, we have high values when it comes to accepting and tolerating every single person, all kinds of people. We believe that bullying is bad. But there's some hypocrisy with this, like is in any other value. Because in our American culture, we think that we can bully rich people, right? Because we think they don't have feelings. They're not people, right? We can make fun of them. And then that's kind of the culture that we have here in the United States. But I know that for some of you, what I'm going to talk about today, I kind of want to wrestle with this idea that high value that you have of being tolerant to every kind of person, all kinds of people, is actually a reflection of your Christian values in your nation. And the reason why I sometimes make myself part of we, as I talk about as an American citizen, is I became a U.S. citizen 5 years ago. So I have 17 years of my life that I could see as an outsider, as a foreigner, in terms of what we're talking about. That I see those values, and I don't know if you know this or not, but those are part of your Christian values as a nation. Because the reality is that respect for the individual is not normal. Respect for the individual is not normal. What is natural. What is normal or natural is might makes right. That was normal. That's what's natural. In fact, if you go to any other nation and you visit and you learn about their cultures, when you hear what's happening in the news, and we ask the question, what's going on in those countries? And we think, how come they cannot get along? How come they treat children that way? How come they treat women that way? How come they treat that group of people that way? When we ask those kind of questions, we think, don't they supposed to have some kind of a value to respect the people around them? Don't they know that that we all have individual values as people? And the answer is no. Because that is not natural. The natural thing to do is what happened to you and me in middle school. That is natural. Natural is when we find out something and we power up. Natural is when we find something wrong with someone and we leverage it. Natural is when we see someone that is a little bit different and we point out those differences for our own advantage. That is natural. And I don't know where or who do you sometimes try to power up over, but I know it's in you. And I know it's in me. It's in all of us. And a lot of the times, again, that group of people have no control over it. We've all been guilty of this. But here's the thing. Our assumption that individuals have value is something we learned. that this whole idea of that individuals have value, is something we've been taught. It's something you and I have learned. And this is what Thomas Jefferson actually wrote in these famous words that I learned during my U.S. citizen test and you learn in school. But this document of the Declaration of Independence kind of speaks a little bit on this. And it says this: we hold this truth to be self-evident. Now pause. What is self-evident? When you pause long enough and you think about something and you say, you know what? Yeah, we should respect that. That is self-evident. That is a self-evident truth. We hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. That, in other words, that the Creator God, has a group of people He also cared for, that He created. And therefore, that people should have an equal status, because we all under the Creator. That there should be equality among men, women, children, because we all under His creation. But the founding fathers, and they also left this kind of, the next part of the Declaration of Independence that I think is very, very interesting. It says this, that to secure these rights, in other words, even though it should be self-evident, we should secure it. Why? Because it's not natural. Natural is we make fun of people. Natural is I leverage or I discriminate to people, to a group of people that are different than me. That is what's natural. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of their governed. That even though we think these are self-evident truths, that every once in a while we should be reminded by a group, by an entity or a government, hey, you cannot treat people like that. You cannot say that about that group of people. Because if we don't have this, someone reminding us of this self-evident truth, we evolve into a race of people that do all kinds of terrible things to a group of people that not only don't deserve it, but most of the time, they can't do anything about it. So it's only self-evident for those who understand that there is a Creator and there's His creation. Because self-evident isn't natural. For example, it is self-evident that you should exercise 30 minutes every day. But do we do it? No, we don't. Why? Because that's natural, not to do it. It is self-evident that we're supposed to eat our vegetables. But we don't do it. Why? Because that's natural. Oftentimes we opt for what's natural over what is self-evident. So today, I want to ask this question and wrestle with this with you. Honest to God, if God is a good God, why is there so much division in our world? Why do we tend to pick natural over what is self-evident? It's things that you and I are supposed to know and hold them as truth, as a human race. And most importantly, how should we react against what we feel is natural? Because this is the main idea of what we're talking about in this series, right? That we can come to God and ask honest questions. And we say that if you are a follower of Jesus, we begin since Easter saying that there was a document that we find in the Bible. Is by an author, very creative title. It's called John. And in this book, he follows this man of Jesus and he writes down what he sees. And if you truly have an honest question, we say, fine, wrestle with that and see what you come up after reading the book of John. And we say that one of the major things that as followers of Jesus we believe, where we have to start, is that Jesus became flesh. That's a concept hard for us to understand. That God became human, and we ask why? Why did he have to become one of us? And we said that we know the Sunday school answer because, he came to die for your sins, for my sin. But we say, what if there's something as important as that found in the scriptures? What if Jesus came not only to die for your sins and my sin, but so you and I could see with our own eyes and could listen the character of God. So you and I could see what God is like. So today, what I want to do is wrestle with another concept of this whole premise of the life of Jesus. And it's this, that Jesus also came to elevate the dignity of the individual. That another reason why God sent his son is to elevate the dignity of the individual. Because for us, it's so hard to understand this. Because we watch documentaries, we watch movies of where Jesus came on earth. But if we think about it, during those times in the first century, people were considered commodities. People were owned. When we think of slavery, and we think of maybe the colonial America, which was a horrible time in our history, or pre-Civil War, at least during that time, there was a threat. There was like a conscience of a God, of a creator. And even though that didn't move people to treat people differently, at least there was this concept of this idea about a God, a creator. But when Jesus stepped into our world, there was none of that. There was none of that. And the first century people had no necessity to treat each other well. There was no sense of God holding anyone accountable the way they treated each other. Nobody thought in those terms, in terms of the Greek, and nobody thought in terms of taking care of others, like the Romans. Nobody did. So people were owned. And even in the slavery world, there was kind of like a hierarchy. You had your household slaves, then you had your field slaves, and then you had kind of the slaves that work in the mine. Children had no right. A lot of the times, children were not even given names until they were older because they were not expected to live. Women had no rights at all. They couldn't buy property. They couldn't even sometimes pick who they want to marry. So individuals had no value. And in this world, if you have money, you have power, you were seen as somebody that God blessed. So consequently, people sought after more power, more money. And in this world, even the religious leaders suppress people, the individuals. So everywhere that you look, you can see injustice upon injustice upon injustice. No one view the world as you and I see it today. And into this world, Jesus steps in. And he elevates the dignity of people through his teachings. And he elevates the dignity of people through the way he interacted with them. You're familiar with some of these stories. And I will just summarize them for you, but the teaching of the Good Samaritan, you've heard that before. And when Jesus taught that parable, he takes someone like a Samaritan, an outcast, and he makes him the hero of the story. In that parable, the Samaritan, the person that nobody wanted to be compared to, becomes a person with more grace, with more compassion, and more mercy than the people who gave the givers of the law or the priest. Another parable where we can see in his teachings that he elevated dignity is a trilogy of lost, they call them. It's the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. And in every single example, the parable is not just to say, oh, how cute. The parable is about elevating the dignity of people who have no rights and were not perceived as people who had dignity or respect. The other story you may be familiar, maybe you heard it in Sunday school, is the widow's mite. And in this, Jesus is standing in the temple, and you see a lot of people coming in and dropping big dollars on the offering. And then this little poor lady walks in and drops just a little bit of money. And Jesus says, she gave more. And the people with Jesus are like, no, 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 no. The other people gave more. And Jesus said, no, she was more righteous because she gave everything. And you and I think of that story and we think, oh, that's cute. He cares for the poor. But it goes deeper than that because this woman, this widow, had her back turned against God. I mean, why would God take away from her husband? What was she doing in the temple? Why would she give something back when the only rights that she could have was stripped away from her? And now she's a widow. And that's why Jesus says, she gave more. And if you read the Gospels, you will find time after time after time, Jesus' teachings elevated the people around him. The people that otherwise wouldn't be elevated in that culture. Now he did that through his teachings and also the way he interacted with people. And this is one of the best things you and I can do. And this is going to be part of our assignment as we live today. That the way we interact with others truly matters. And this is why we're reading the book of John together to see how Jesus interacted with people. There's a story of the woman of the well. And in that story, you know, the disciples and Jesus they're walking through Samaria. And they go and grab something to eat, and Jesus stays and talks to these women. And when they come back, John says that they were shocked. Not because he was only speaking to a woman, but he was speaking also to a Samaritan. But in doing so, he elevated the dignity of women. Another story you're familiar with is the story of, you know, when Jesus is teaching and children rush to Jesus, they try to touch him or be held by him. And the disciples say, no, not children. And you're not reading them. What type of disciples are those that they couldn't love kids? But in the context, that was the normal thing to do. Parents were afraid to be attached to their kids because they didn't know how long they were going to live. Children had no value. So they become older and they were able to work and provide something for the family. And again, in doing so, he elevated the dignity of kids and children. And also he elevated the status of the sick people. I mean, they didn't understand anything about germs, like you and I understand today, but they knew something. You don't touch somebody that is sick. And Jesus constantly touched the ill. And towards the end of his life, Jesus begins a conversation with a convict. And he promised this convict that because the fact that he recognized who Jesus was, that very day, this convict will receive the full grace and full mercy of a father. I mean, throughout his ministry, Jesus paused and gave dignity to the people around him in a very different world and chaotic world. One day, Jesus receives an invitation by a Pharisee. And because he doesn't discriminate, he says, yes, I'll go to your house. And he shows up, and Luke tells us that a woman comes around and starts washing Jesus' feet. And we read this in Luke chapter 7:39. This Pharisee's name is Simon. And it says, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, now pause before we continue going. If you read the Gospels, you see that a lot. When he says to himself, he's thinking. He didn't even say it out loud. And this freaked people out. That they thought things, and they just say, like, oh, let me answer what you're thinking. What? That happens a lot, but we read it so fast that we miss it. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he will know who's touching him and what kind of a woman she is, that she is a sinner. In other words, they're eating, right? They're having dinner. And then this woman comes, washes their feet, and he goes, oops, he doesn't know. He's not even a prophet. He's not a Messiah if he's not a prophet. And what are we going to talk the rest of the time we're eating together? Because that's why they wanted to know if he was the Son of God or not. That's what people ask him all the time. So the fact that you had a woman touching Jesus' feet told the people around him, people that knew the law, told that he wasn't who he claimed to be. Because you know something? There was something they understood very well back then. You don't touch sinners, and you don't let sinners touch you, because you get sinnerness all over you. and we love, but it was in a way almost like we feel we get corrupted, right? Or in a way that somehow we have to prove that we're better than them. That God can possibly do something or love someone like that. And Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. Again, he was just thinking. He didn't even say it, but I got something to tell you. And he goes on and talks about a parable about two men. One who owed a lot of money, and another one who owed a little bit of money. And then he asked this Pharisee, for a lender. And the lender, forgives their debt, both of them. And then he asked, who will be more grateful? The one who owed a lot or the one who owed a little bit? And probably Simon is thinking, this is a tricky question, obviously. I mean, this is an easy one. Obviously, the one who owed a lot. But basically, I think what Jesus was trying to tell us with this parable and with this conversation with the Pharisees, he said, Simon, you are so unaware of your own sin that you think other people are worse than you. In other words, Simon, you can learn a thing or two from the sinful woman. Everywhere Jesus went, he elevated the status and the dignity of the individual. And the punctuation, the bottom line of this whole story is when Jesus died, because he also elevated people's dignity through his death. And this is the thing now, if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, I'm going to speak to you directly. And if you don't, if you're here today just checking it out, that's fine. You get a pass on this one. But think about this. If we really believe that God sent his son to the world, and that he died for our sins, and that he came so you and I could see what God was like, do we understand, as the followers of Jesus, that at the cross, we all are made equal? That somehow, when we're here, and I read this, and sorry, I cannot quote the person who, I was reading a magazine, but it just kind of got stuck in my mind. Somebody was saying that when we're on earth, we can see the valleys and the mountains very clearly. But when you see the world out of space, you see like something just like a flat circle. Perhaps, in terms of holiness, perhaps Jesus looks at you and me, looks at the rest of the world and says, you know what? There's not that much difference. Now, Paul in Romans said something a little bit very similar. He said this, very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. Verse 8, very strong words, the first two, but God. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Have you heard that before? And us means all of us. But that us also means all the people in your work, those us's in your work, those us at school, those friends of that you see a difference, that people that you kind of have a bad attitude towards. Somehow Jesus was able to be the gap of all classes and all people. Because for Jesus, he just saw people. And it wasn't that he was naive. It wasn't that he was turning his eyes. It was more that apparently, in terms of his holiness, as we compare, there's not a whole lot of a difference. It wasn't that he had to die a little bit more for a group of people and he had to die a little bit less for others. Because for his vantage point, we all needed a Savior. For his vantage point, he was the one reaching that gap that we see, that we all experience. Perhaps this gives you a better understanding why the world is the way that what's happening around our world. And perhaps also this gives us a big insight of how lack of tolerance Jesus had for self-righteous people. Jesus never tolerated, whoa, I'm really messing, the accent is coming out really hard now. Tolerated, there you go, people who saw themselves better, morally, or just better, period. Which means that you and I, at the cross, we can discriminate anybody for any reason. Everybody's somebody that God loves. Now, as I was building this teaching, what I love about our church in these 4 days of experiencing this together is that I love we're very diverse. And I love that, but I still wanted to talk on this because I believe some of you still struggle with this. And more than that, I want us to set the culture of where we're heading as a church. That at no point in our life as an experienced church, we feel that there's people outside of the boundaries of God's mercy and God's grace. That everybody's somebody that Jesus died for. Now that is self-evident, but it's not natural. So, honest to God, why is there so much division in our world? Because it's natural. But our vision as a church is to grow in whatever area that you feel right now God is tagging your heart. That is going to require us to be messy. I mean, we don't even meet every Sunday. Why? Because we want to leverage other Sundays to not say to the community, hey, we started a church, you should come. But hey, we started a church, we're going to go to you. And that is a paradigm shift. Because in doing so, hopefully we raise the dignity of the people around us. Now I'm going to push you a little bit more and then we're going to close. Because I hope you don't miss this. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, you cannot live with that I am better than you attitude towards anyone. Because maybe for some of you, you don't like smart people. Or maybe you don't like people that aren't smart. Some of you don't like skinny people. Or you don't like people that are not in shape. Some of you don't like white people, black people, brown people. If you don't like a brown person, it's just going to be very difficult for you to be here. Just kidding. I had to break the ice because I feel the tension. There's a lot of tension. But we all have it in us. And if you're a follower of Jesus, or in fact, let me just give you a way out. If you're not a follower of Jesus, have at it. Because that is natural. But if you are a follower of Jesus, we are held to higher standards. And I hope today you come and talk to us. I hope you engage in a conversation with someone else. I hope you go and talk to maybe the person who invited you. Or more importantly, I hope you engage in a conversation with your Creator. And to use a biblical word, you seek repentance. Because if there was one thing that Jesus was totally against, it was self-righteousness. And some of you, maybe you know, hey, I love everybody, all colors or flavors. And I want to challenge you with an extra step. I read this quote this week. Treat people as if they were what they ought to be, and you help them become what they are capable of becoming. For some of you, it's not that you have something against someone, it's that you haven't or raised the dignity of someone else around you. It's not that you don't like a group of people, but with your words, you haven't been giving words of life to someone else. And words are powerful. And as believers of Jesus, we should be the people who raise the dignity of everyone, not just those that think like we think. So I wrote down a couple examples just to make it easy. Because I wrote even for myself. As I see, for example, my daughter, maybe I can practice with my daughter. If I see struggling with trust, because she has two older kids so she doesn't care. She just does whatever she wants to do. She just gets it, she has an attitude. So I'm going to speak these kind of words to elevate. And you guys think it's funny, and you just see it growing, and she's a teenager, and I get so scared. Lord, thank you that Joy is becoming a lady who can be trusted in all situations. Lord, help Ezekiel and me become a man of character. If you see a gift in your spouse, or in somebody you're single, somebody you work with, what have you done to lift that dignity up? And if you see the gift of leadership by saying that, what a great leader you are. I can't wait to see what God does through you. This is our assignment. That I hope in the next 2 weeks that we don't meet, you will have a lot of opportunities to raise the dignity of the people around you. I pray that you seek for that opportunity. And in doing so, imagine what our marriage will look like. Imagine what is your family gonna look like. When you don't pick the part that is kind of like, that we know is already messed up, but when you pick the area where you have the opportunity to elevate the dignity of that person. And if we do that not only with our family, we do that at work, we do that in the park, wow. Perhaps, honest to God, we can make a difference and stop the division that we see in our world. Let's pray. Father, thank you for being an incredible example by giving us your Son, by showing us how much you care, how much you value us, how much you love us. Lord, I know this is a hard teaching for some people here in the room. I pray, Lord, that they will dig deep and have the courage to speak about this, to speak about perhaps their past. And I also pray for those who've been on the receiving end. That a lot of times they have no control over. Lord, I pray that as they seek you, I pray that you will tell them how much you care for them, how much you love them, that the stories of your gospels will resonate, how much you truly care about the individual. That if they feel far away from you, after today, after the conversation, they'll know that you're calling them, that you're willing to restore their pain and become a father like no other father they ever had. And Lord, I pray as a church, as young as we are, Lord, I pray that you keep this teaching constant in our minds. that as we go and do life outside of here is what matters, and that is will attract people to you. That we have to love regardless of what they think or how they believe. That you over and over showed us that engaging in a conversation can truly change the perspective in someone's life. That in those times that we want to do the natural thing and say what is in our minds, we truly can pause and think like you think. It's in the powerful name